Hello and welcome to Nerd Cookies. In this episode, I'll be talking about force healing and its place in Star Wars lore. Spoilers for Rise of Skywalker and The Mandalorian. If you've seen my Mandalorian review of chapters 2 and 7, then you know where I stand on the new force healing technique presented in Disney Star Wars. To summarize, in The Mandalorian Chapter 2, we see Baby Yoda trying to reach out to the Mandalorian to seemingly want to heal him. Right away, this concerned me, and in Chapter 7, my fears were confirmed when Baby Yoda healed Karga after he was attacked by a poisonous, pterodactyl-like creature. I didn't like this force technique because it really seemed shoehorned in here by the higher-ups at Disney to make the force healing in Rise of Skywalker, which premiered after this episode, not seem so strange. The Rise of Skywalker, however, takes it to an even further level, resurrecting people that have suffered fatal injuries. The reason why this bothers me is quite simple, actually. Force healing, as it is presented in The Mandalorian, and then very prominently so in The Rise of Skywalker, is unprecedented in Star Wars lore. In the many books and comics that are now known as Legends canon, force healing is presented in quite a different way. A Jedi healing oneself even is not that common. There are cases of Ki-Adi-Mundi and Luke and a few others healing themselves by basically accelerating one's natural healing process and by going into a meditative trance. And serious wounds can take long periods of meditation and concentration and require great aptitude with the Force. And even for powerful Force users, it was never instantaneous. And even rare in Star Wars lore are when Jedi heal others. In the Thrawn duology, Luke only assisted Mara Jade into going into this healing trance, and that was it. And it takes great aptitude with the Force and time depending on how powerful the Force user is and how serious the injury. In the Star Wars Legends books, there's one notable example of straight-up healing others when the Force healer Kilgal saved Mon Mothma from a molecular poison. And even this instance involved the detection and removal of nanomachines that were afflicting her, like drawing poison from a wound, not a direct application of Force energy that we see in Disney Star Wars. The Star Wars Legends books, while not technically canon, are still stories that were crafted over decades, with the writers working very closely with Lucasfilm to make sure the story fit within the universe George Lucas created. For me, it's plain to see why these instances of force healing are few and far between in Star Wars Legends. Simply put, it inhibits the ability to tell a good story. J.J. Abrams doesn't see it that way. In his comments to Vanity Fair regarding this movie, Abrams said, "We wanted to make sure that this picture also showed aspects of the Force in ways that go beyond what you've seen before." When I read that, the question I had was, do we really need to see aspects of the Force that go beyond what we've seen before? Is that necessary to tell a good story? Absolutely not. When we see the original trilogy, is there an incredible display of Force power that blows your mind? Are there lightsaber battles that are incredibly epic? No. But those movies are amazing. And why is that? Because of the story and the relationships between the characters. As George Lucas has always said, Star Wars is about relationships and telling those stories in this universe. A universe that has clearly established rules. If every Force user can use an ability like force healing to the scale of which Baby Yoda, Rey, and Ben Solo can, then it significantly lowers the stakes and consequences for one's actions. It doesn't make for a good story. In regards to The Mandalorian, I am fully engrossed in this show, and it's not at all because of the visuals, the effects, or the use of Force powers I've never seen before. What I like the most about this show is the relationship between the Mandalorian and the child. And also the relationships with the other characters like Kuil and Cara Dune and IG-11. This is what keeps audiences roped in and wanting more. The issue of force healing now is how this affects news stories moving forward. In any future Star Wars content, if there are any light-side, force-sensitive characters who have allies that suffer mortal damage, the question will always be, why don't they just force heal them? This hinders storytelling, and that will always need to be addressed. Besides the issue that it's a superpowered ability that greatly inhibits effective storytelling, I also have a problem with this because of what it means purely for the episodic saga and the overarching story throughout. This is another example that disconnects the Disney trilogy with the rest of the movies when they were supposed to be uniting them. The only time in the movies where there has been anything even close to force healing was when Obi-Wan used a kind of smelling salts technique to wake Luke up after he suffered a likely concussion. Other than that, there is not one instance of force healing shown. And you'd think there would be more, especially when the Jedi were at the height of their power and knowledge in the prequel trilogy. Yet all but a few of them are wiped out. For me, this basically breaks all the known rules of Star Wars. For instance, if this exists in the universe, why couldn't Obi-Wan heal his master Qui-Gon? You would think he would know about this technique. He for sure would have done it considering how much he felt for his master. And wouldn't have Anakin healed his mother? How could the Jedi not have known about this technique? If they did, Anakin wouldn't have gone to the dark side. He would have known there was a way that could save Padme. And the scene with Obi-Wan and Anakin at the end of Revenge of the Sith, it kind of begins like Rey and Kylo Ren in their confrontation. Yet after gaining the upper hand, Rey has a change of heart and heals him. Wouldn't Obi-Wan have done the same after Anakin, who was like a brother to him, suffered incredibly painful mortal injuries? Wouldn't that have changed Anakin and brought him back from the dark side then? What's the explanation for all this now? There are so many plot holes now because of this blatant disregard for the universe of Star Wars and what's been long established in it. Also, if this was a known Force power, then why don't all Jedi learn Force healing first? After all, Yoda tells Luke in The Empire Strikes Back that a Jedi never uses the Force for attack, only for knowledge and defense. What better power to use for defense than to literally heal wounds? Some may present an argument that there is Force healing in Star Wars games like Star Wars The Old Republic. And while technically that is Star Wars, most MMOs have a pretty standard Trinity formula of healers, tanks, and DPS. This formula, however, cannot translate to movies and books because the realism is lost in these kinds of video games. In the Old Republic and other games like it, you have to hit the enemy multiple times with a lightsaber to whittle down their health bar. And your character can usually take many dozens of hits from blasters and lightsabers before you'll actually go down. That obviously is not the case in the movies, as one strike to the body with a lightsaber is usually the end of it. So it's not a fair comparison because of the fact that games have their own system of damage and healing to make each encounter more fun and challenging. And I'm not saying Force healing shouldn't be presented in Star Wars movies, but it needs to have consequences and limitations. Nothing should be so overpowered that it will influence all the other stories that could be told in this universe. I'm very curious to see how Disney handles Force healing and future content. My gut tells me they'll do the same as they did with the weaponization of lightspeed in The Last Jedi, aka the Holdo maneuver, which will be to make Force healing, as seen in The Rise of Skywalker, a special circumstance which can't be replicated. These kinds of decisions to push the limits of what we know about the Force are reckless, and only serve to further fracture the logic of the Star Wars universe, and it requires fans to turn their brains off if they want to enjoy the movie. And while many out there are happy to do so, there are many others that simply will stop seeing these movies and shows altogether. I certainly hope that Disney gets back to basics and stops trying to reinvent the wheel and jump the shark with all these new Force abilities, or with trying to do something with these stories that push the limits and challenges the audience. While I don't agree with Disney's handling of the majority of their Star Wars content, there are definitely some bright spots in the Disney Star Wars cinematic universe, like The Mandalorian and Rogue One, which both focus on respecting the lore and the defined laws of the Star Wars universe. One example of this in Rogue One was the character Chirrut Imwe. Getting to see his devotion to the Force, although not knowing any Force abilities, truly added to his character and made him interesting. We didn't see him do amazing things that had never been done before, but nonetheless, his character was amazing because of his nobility, his faith, and his loyalty to his friends. I feel the same about the inclusion of the Darth Vader scene at the end of Rogue One as well. It seemed very much in the same vein as the SC-38 Star Wars reimagined scene. This scene just added to Vader's infamy and how he is viewed as a fearsome warrior and a real force in the original trilogy, and complements and pays homage to the original movies and characters very well. These are the kinds of creative decisions I hope Disney chooses to make in the future. But at this point, as long as Disney starts to explore all new stories with all new characters instead of meddling with the legacies of the already established and beloved characters, then I'm still open to see what they can do with the franchise moving forward. On the other hand, if they continue to introduce new concepts that create plot holes like ship fuel, the Holdo maneuver, and force healing, these choices run the risk of continuing to fracture the logic of how the Star Wars universe works, and will ultimately cripple the ability to tell good, cohesive stories. I'm curious to know what you guys think. Is the introduction of force healing a mistake? Should Disney be more careful with what new force powers they introduce into the Star Wars universe? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for future content. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, have a very nerdy day.